I will talk a little bit about understanding your users in Fintech. Works very well again. Here, I have an introduction slide to myself. Irina introduced me already. You can see me here in a very probably old picture where I kind of used my first product. So it started pretty early, and probably I was also posing for my Instagram. Not sure if it existed already back then. So yeah, I mean, Irina introduced me already. I founded in college already, also with like not that much success. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't work at N26 right now, even though it's a great company. Yeah, I went from engineer to product manager. I have 3 years of combined experience in Fintech right now. That's also why it's mostly understanding users in Fintech, even though most of what I will talk about is probably also applicable in other industries. So Irina already asked the question, who is a customer? Who actually heard about N26 and knows what we are doing? It probably gives a lot of more hands, yes. You would actually be surprised how few people say yes to that question if you're not asking it to a startup crowd. Yeah, I have some introduction slides about N26, but I will keep it pretty short as most people of you heard about us already. So our vision is to build the bank the world loves to use, which has some parts in it. So one of it is obviously we are building a bank which kind of narrows down already what we are doing. But one of the more important things in it is the world. So what we are doing is we are building really a global product. So not a bank for Germany or for Europe, but a global one. And the part, in my opinion, that it's the most important one is the world as the loves to use. So we believe that banking should not be something you have to do because you need to get your salary somehow or that you have to deal with, but it should be something that should be fun to deal with and that gives you a nice experience and actually makes your life easier. So yeah, as I said, I will do this pretty quick. So we have a lot of big numbers. We are in a lot of different countries. We announced US and Brazil this year, so that's when that world part actually becomes really true. We are also a lot of people by now, very diverse team, 3 offices in different parts of the world. But yeah, let's get to the topic, understanding your users. And why? So that's always a good question to ask, and this is a product meetup from what I understood. So why do we care about our users in product? As product managers, you usually care about what we want to build, when we want to build it, and also why we want to build it. We care usually less about the how, because that is more of an engineering problem usually, but depends a little bit on the stage. Especially in early stage startups, you will also deal a lot with the how. But if we look at these 3 main questions, to get somewhat of an answer to them, you will need to know your users. You will need to know what your current users want. You will need to know what your future users want. And if we dig a little bit more deeper into how the product design process looks like, so there are a lot of different frameworks. I'm a fan of the double diamond, also because it helps me prove my point here. Because it has these 2 diamonds, which basically say you start at the problem, you at some point want to get to a problem definition, and then you want to get to a solution. So if you look at the first diamond, it is of critical importance that you know what your users want. Because if you don't, you will just work on the wrong problems, or you will understand them wrong. And once you understand them, you have to find the right solutions. That's why it's still at high importance in the second diamond. And also because I'm a product person, you will never see me make a slide which says user understanding is less important here. So it's only high and critical. That's the 2 levels we have. And yeah, even if you are deep in delivery, so you have a probably simple product and you have it scoped out, you are, let's say, 99% sure what you want to build, there's always added complexity and you will need to make ad hoc decisions along the way where you have to have a certain understanding of what your users want. So what happens if you don't? So this is probably and I see a very bad slide I actually made. But I'm a fan of real-world examples, even though we are working on digital products. So what you see here is actually a real construction site in Berlin. I'm not sure if it's still there anymore. It's close to Janowitzbrücke. And basically what happened there is you had a sidewalk, And there was some construction work on the sidewalk here, which obviously prevents people from continuing their way on the sidewalk. So they needed to find a solution for that. So they needed to find a way that people can continue their way in a safe way. So what did they come up with? They added this bicycle lane here so that bikes can continue. And then I added traffic lights here so people can cross the street, continue the way on the other side, and then I added traffic lights over there so you can go back. Which somewhat solves the problem, but you can really see that no one ever thought about what would happen if you really do this, because no one in their right mind, and especially in Berlin, and I know we are in Germany where everyone follows rules, no one will do that. Because if you just want to continue for 20 meters, there's no way you will wait two traffic lights just to do that. So everyone will just go through the bicycle lane. So what did they do? They didn't listen to their users, and they ended up with a product, with a solution that no one uses. So they didn't actually solve the problem in reality. And now, as we basically established that you should understand your users and listen to them, what is your toolbox? You have quantitative data, looking at like how the people use your product, market data, and a lot of stuff that is out there. You have qualitative data, user testing, user research, interviews, and you can exchange with other people within your industry, academia. So I will focus mostly on this part. Mostly because this is the single tool that everyone can use. It doesn't matter if you are a small startup, if you just have an idea, if you already have a product. If you're a big company, if you're a corporation, you can and you always should do user research. So I will give a quick introduction on how to perform user research, just a few insights on how we do that at N26, and then I will get to the, in my opinion, a little bit more interesting part on some learnings, especially in the field of dealing with finance. So our setup is we always do user research interviews with 2 to 3 people, plus the person we are interviewing. These people are, in most cases, a designer and a product owner, and a visitor. The visitor can be an engineer from the product, it can be someone from marketing, or it can be just a person who is interested in the topic or in learning about user research, which I think, like tying back to the last talk, is also a very good thing to get that into the culture, because you want user research not to only be a thing of product managers or designers. And there are some simple rules. You never invite more people, because for the people you invite, it's already quite intimidating setup. It's always one person who leads the discussion. The rest is always just listening, taking notes. Officially, no one works on the product. So in reality, the people in the session will be working on it most of the time, but we always tell users we are not, for them to not hold back criticism. And always try to ask very open questions. A session usually has roughly this flow. You start with legal formalities. In our case, we often sign an NDA. You probably don't do this if you're more early stage. Ask if a recording is okay. You then do some warm-up to loosen up the situation a little bit, ask general questions like, for how long do you live in Berlin? These kind of things. You then have pre-exercise questions, which are more towards what you actually want to achieve. So you will ask people about their relation to the company, their relation to the topic you're investigating. And then, that's the most exciting part, you usually have an exercise, which means you either have a prototype or some task you want the user to perform. And you will then ask follow-up questions regarding how did the person feel doing this? Did they feel it was easy? Did they understand what was going on? These kind of things. And in the end, which is also a very nice thing to do, is we always take a photo, which has the simple reason that it's just much easier to remember the session and tying your findings back to a person and to the general vibe in the session if you have a face to it. And you obviously have to ask people if they're okay with that. And for all these things, you should prepare a discussion guide. So this is basic, I would say basic research. A lot of people of you, maybe who did research in their bachelor's or master's, will know a lot of these things if they did interviews for these theses. It's quite similar actually. So you should prepare a guide for all these things, prepare questions, so you have some guidance and you're not missing out on the steps. Some tool recommendations. We like to use InVision for prototyping. We like to use Miro or former real-time board to organizing the results. But never forget, you can always prototype using paper. Printer is your friend. Sometimes it's even better because it gives people a different focus. While if you build high fidelity prototypes with InVision, people usually start to focus on the visuals. And how to get started? Just do it. Sorry, Nike, for claiming this slogan, but you just need to do it. Obviously, read up on it, but the most important thing is to do it and learn along the way. And yes, really, you should just do it. It's important. So let's go to, as I said before, what I think is the more interesting part of this talk. Why is fintech different and what can we do about it? Especially when it comes to developing products and user research. The first thing is, almost everything around fintech finances is legacy. And what most people will think about when I say this is about old banks having old systems and they are slow in developing their things, yada, yada, yada. But that's not what I mean. That is definitely true and it is an advantage if you start something new. But what I'm trying to refer here to is the user experience. Everything that we see right now in banking is basically the same for 500 years. So when you go back 500 years, a bank was probably some kind of paper ledger where someone wrote in, this person owes me that much money, this person has that much money in their account, and then, I don't know, banks got bigger, the internet came along, and what they did was just taking this and putting it to the internet. So basically, they didn't think about what new opportunities does that give us? Can we solve new problems? Is there anything else we can do for our users? What they did was just, okay, user, instead of coming to our place, you can now check your stuff online. And to clarify this, we can do a little exercise, which is, you see two accounts here, one of Fantasy Bank, which is basically completely for free, gives you a lot of ATMs, and Imagination Bank, which charges some fees for foreign transactions and a monthly fee, and gives you less ATMs. So if you look at these banks, most people would probably agree that the Fantasy Bank is the better offer. But the reality is that nothing of this really matters. But this is exactly how a lot of people think, because they think in terms of what is already there. So they are comparing fees, they are comparing transaction costs, ATMs, but no one is actually thinking about, if I'm a customer of Imagination Bank and I switch to Fantasy Bank, is my life actually better afterwards? Am I happier? Does it make my life easier? I might save like 12 euros, but maybe the experience of the other offer is so bad that I would be glad to pay 12 euros for it. And this really shows that basically customers, especially in finance, are very biased towards what they know, because finance is such an old industry that has changed so little. And especially in terms of building products and interviewing your users, you need to focus on the why. Why are people doing it? What they do. So an example is, for example, if you ask someone, what do you expect to when you open your bank account on your phone or on the web? A lot of people will say something like, I expect to see my balance. If you say, okay, then I build my starting page and will show balance. Sounds fine. But if you ask them why, they will say, yeah, I want to know, I don't know, how much money I have. Why do you want to know how much money you have? Because I'm trying to buy something and I want to know if I can afford it. Why? Because I don't want to overspend. And you realize that this gives you a completely different problem that you actually will want to solve. So always ask the 3 whys and try to understand the mental models of the users. So you want to understand what is actually going on in people's head when they are doing what they are doing, and where is the gap between what the current offers are offering and what they are doing after that in their head. And this is your space for opportunity. Second, finances are a very personal topic. Probably surprises no one. Most people feel uncomfortable talking about their salary, or there is some kind of stigmata to being poor as well as to being rich. So it's always connected to stereotypes. And yeah, I mean, finances influence a lot of things. They influence, for a lot of people, status in society. They can determine, they can be a source of distress, they can be a source of happiness, even though everyone says money doesn't make you happy. Still, everyone is happy if they win the lottery or get a raise, at least in the first place. It has obvious impact on your lifestyle, what you can afford, on your dreams and desires, again, what you can afford, what travel you can make, all these kind of things. And because it's such a sensitive and personal topic, you always have to keep in mind, if you ask users questions, their answers will be somewhere, some spot between the actual reality and the projection of themselves where they want to see themselves. For example, people don't like to be perceived as poor, so no one will really say that. They will, okay, some people might, but if you are, especially if you are in a society where there is a lot of admiration for richer people, people will adapt their answers because they are talking to strangers right now and no one can confirm anyway what they are saying. So, because it's such a personal topic, you need to focus a lot on the emotions of the problem. And what you will actually want to do is, if you're building something, or if you're showing a prototype to a user, you will want to understand how they feel. What is their emotional state when they start doing what you show them? How does it change afterwards, and how does it change in between? So you might uncover steps in their financial processes or in your product that just cause stress to users, that are very annoying, that are inconvenient, and this is where you have to work on. And as I said before, it's usually not very helpful to ask direct questions about a user's financial situation, because in a lot of cases you will just not get real answers that you can work with. 3, lots of cultural differences in finance. So this ties a little bit back to what I said in the beginning, that we are trying to build a truly global product, and finance is obviously very different in different cultures. So one easy example that probably a lot of people heard about already is the comparison between the USA and Germany. In Germany, as you can see also in Berlin, in a lot of places, people pay with cash most of the time. In the US, especially in the big cities, it's mostly credit cards. People in Germany prefer fixed rate savings without risk, while in the US a lot more people invest in stocks. So people are way more willing to take risk financially in some societies than in others. And also in the means of payments. I mean, we had it in credit and cash, but also in means of getting paid. In Germany, almost everyone gets their salary with a direct debit. I remember when I was working in the US, I was paid with a check, which was directly debited in my bank account. So it was somewhat similar in the experience, but it has obvious implications that people deal very different with their finances. So you should never jump to conclusions across country borders. That is probably not only true for finance, because you always need to be aware how people deal different in different cultures, different countries. Which also means you should use very diverse samples for your user research. So if you only talk to German people, you will not end up with a good product for the US. And obviously you should also prioritize differently. So if you prioritize a fixed term savings product for the US, it's probably not gonna give you a lot of users. Closing arguments. So first, as I said probably a lot of times already, talk to your users for everything you build. And I literally mean for everything. And especially, this is, I think, kind of the core message of the previous slides, listen to what they say implicitly. Especially if you're in an industry like finance, where a lot of stuff is legacy, they will tell you a lot of stuff explicitly, which might help you build something. You will probably even build something people use, but you won't change a lot. You will not innovate. You just will build something else, maybe in nicer, maybe in a little bit better, that is already there. And one little more thing, just because I really like to talk about this, exchange. This is really underestimated in my opinion. I'm pretty sure you can find a lot of talks in Berlin and at the Family and at other places about how to deal with quantitative data, how to do user research, just as I just held a talk about it. But Exchange is a very good source of information about users and about other things as well. One of the first things I very often do, especially for big products, is look into my network and see who built something similar or who built something that might be slightly related, who can help me with a very similar problem. Because you can learn from their failures. Everybody will do something wrong if they do it for the first time. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have a question? Over there. Can you maybe come over here?
Hi, thanks. It was a great presentation. One implicit question. Was a perfect pitch, but I didn't get the point for why do I need a designer in the interview phase? Or different, how do we define a designer? Is it for UX, UI? Or is it for you developer in kind of design? Is it data designer? What is it for you designer?
So I'm mostly talking about UX, UI designers. One of the reasons why is, especially in our case, they usually build the prototype, because the prototype is usually, as I said, something like an envisioned prototype. So someone designed it, someone had something specific in mind. Probably in a very, very early stage company, you wouldn't put a designer in this simply because you don't have someone, which is fine, I guess. I mean, in early stage companies, product owners or product managers are often doing that job as well. I mean, this was basically how we do it, and we are obviously a quite big company by now, so we have UX researchers, we have designers that to some degree prepare these sessions.
Yeah. Thanks so much for the great talk. I have two questions, also tying into the other question before. You said in the interviews you are a product person, a designer, and a visitor. Mm-hmm. Do you also have user researchers involved in these activities, or are they doing something else?
So we have user researchers in the company. Mostly when it comes to very specific products, they are usually not involved, but that depends. So they are more, in our case, owning the whole process. They help us setting it up, and they do mostly very big general user research projects on their own. So they are less involved in the very specific product developments, but they do general user research, like where are our users developing, what are our main customers, these kind of things that are more general and more strategic. That is usually what user researchers do at N26.
And a second question, when do you do these kinds of tests?
You mean like
the ones that you just described, like the one where you bring in people for interviews, for example?
So we do that basically for everything that we develop. So basically every feature or basically thing that somewhat ended up being an opportunity, we usually start with user research. So usually we start with more exploratory interviews that might not even have a prototype, but as soon as we moved a little bit more further along and basically understood a little bit of what we are trying to build, we then start doing like prototypes and having this very specific user research sessions where we show different prototypes to users, and that basically helps us to guide the way a little bit.
Okay, I'll be right there. Who was it? Okay. Great that you're sitting next to each other.
Easy. Hey, when you were comparing the two banks, you said experience for the user is really important. I was wondering, how do you measure experience, especially if you want to compare what you've built as successful?
That's a very good question. So, I mean, usually you will try to measure what you discovered before, right? So if your goal could be, for example, to make users feeling more financially safe, right? which is something that is very hard to measure, right? So what you could do in these cases is just do surveys. I mean, you have other things like when you build something in that space, for example, you have the obvious thing that you can measure, like engagement, or just the number of people that sign up. It can be very specific to what you're actually trying to build, but that is one of the core problems actually, because it's really easy to measure things like revenue. It's much harder to measure kind of the soft factors. So one thing, for example, that we measured a lot in the past was the organic rate or the referral rate. So what percentage of our customers referred new customers, because that obviously tells you that they are becoming more like brand evangelists and really like what you're doing. But it's almost a topic of its own.
Thank you. Cool. Thanks for the great presentation. Can you talk a bit about how you recruit these users and how you select them, looking at current users and maybe also future users?
So this is again something that is probably very different for early stage and late stage. So for non-customers, we work with an agency that helps us to get these people. For people that are customers, so we usually try to keep it kind of balanced, interview non-customers and customers. We have a custom-built tool that we built in-house to reach out to these people, because it's not so easy if you're a bank, because it is after our customer data you are dealing with. So we have some guidelines we have to adhere to. But if you are a pretty early stage company, I would just go out to Starbucks, malls, these kind of things. That's stuff that we did in the beginning as well. It just wasn't very practical anymore at some point when you do these sessions very often.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I have a question about the customer segments and who actually is the customer of N26. And I can explain why I'm asking this. Specifically because the picture that you presented on your slide with the crossroad, and you said that the guys were trying to solve the problem of people who are crossing the road, and I'm thinking that maybe they were solving the problem for the bicycle that were going through this road.
Good
and maybe
point.
they have only 3 people crossing this road during the day, while for 100 bicycles actually going on this road. And the next point that I have, I am the user of N26, and I'm being advertising and advocating for this bank. But after they've solved the problem of me joining the online bank, the solving problem stopped. And every time I looked in the bank, I can feel that your main focus and your main customer are actually the banks, the insurance companies, and everyone else who is trying to make the money other than users who are actually using the app. And every time I'm trying to look at, for example, the new spaces that you design, I need to upgrade and buy additional black card. Then if I read terms and conditions, I can see that the terms and conditions are very limited, and they are only providing benefits for certain countries and certain conditions and certain disciplines. So I wonder, how do you segment the customers and who actually driving the development of your product for N26? Mm-hmm. Thanks.
So, I mean, first of all, good point with the bicycle lane. Maybe it's really just bicycle people being the customers of Berlin. So regarding customer segments, I mean, we have different segments. I think we cluster them in roughly 3 types. I'm not sure how publicly I can share these things, but it's roughly like one persona is basically the classic student who's just getting in their financial life. One of them is the more young professional, and one is a little bit older, like people who kind of settled and started thinking about buying a house or getting kids, these kind of things. It's, I mean, first of all, thank you for your feedback. But I mean, obviously, we don't serve all of these customers equally well. And I mean, it's also hard for me to make a statement on which of these we actually serve equally, like how well we serve each of these. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but that is actually one of the points of user research is you are one customer. and a very important one, obviously. But there's a lot of people out there, right? And it's very hard to draw conclusions from your personal situations to like the greater population, right? And even in that regard, to be honest, user research won't help you a lot because it's never statistically significant, right? So I'm not sure if that answered your question, actually.
Okay, we do one more.
First of all, thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting. And yeah, I wanted to ask how you're gonna, like, you are planning to become like global bank, and you said that there are different needs in US and Germany, for example. So how you will adjust it for different countries? So it's going to be like different product, but like just like interesting.
So stay tuned. No, I think what we are trying to do currently is build one global product. We will see how well that goes. Obviously, we have to make adjustments along the way. These market launches in the US and, for example, also Brazil are obviously very big steps for us. So, I mean, product development in general is a very iterative process, right? So what we will launch in the US, and you could see that in other market launches we did, will obviously not have the same feature set than what we have in Germany. So I think the overall goal is to put something out there and then see what happens and learn from what people tell us. Continue with interviews, continue with analyzing the data we have, and then prioritize. I mean, it's right now, it would be, I mean, we obviously did some market research and user research up front, but I'm not sure if it would be a wise idea to already define all the features we want to deliver for these specific markets.
Okay, let's do one more.
Thanks for the talk. Have you ever been surprised by the results of user research? Like you made some assumptions and then you made research, like, wow, we really got it wrong.
Yes, I think it happens quite often, I would say. A lot of examples that come to my mind from recent sessions I'm not allowed to talk about. But one example, for example, is, I'm not sure, are you a customer? So you probably use Spaces. So Spaces is, for example, one thing that was one result of a surprising finding. So because what we thought we would be building is something like, which ties also quite well back to the talk topic. We thought we will build something like overnight savings. So something like, we thought people are interested in saving money and getting a lot of interest on it or something like this. And then when talking to people, we realized that most people, when they open savings account, they actually don't care about the interest really. If you will ask them, they will say, yeah, I want to have a savings account with more interest. I like higher interest. I mean, obviously everyone wants to have high interest. But especially in a time where, how much interest do you get? 0.5 tops. We realized that the real value is for people, they want to separate their money. They do mental accounting. So they want to put money aside that they don't have in their face all the time because otherwise they will spend it. Or they want to put it in different buckets. So that was for me, for example, a quite kind of an epiphany.
Okay, thanks a lot for the talk and the wonderful questions. If you have more to ask, you can stick around and ask. Thanks a lot.
Que la famille